Despite desperate attempts to find the missing and solve the case, the police couldn't make any progress. There were no witnesses or clear evidence, and the owners of the 6 Mile Wayfarer house insisted they knew nothing. Besides, as we remember, the Fisher couple were in good standing with the police and locals, and it never occurred to anyone that they could be involved in the disappearances. But one day, everything changed. Around 1819, a man named John Peoples went to the police, claiming that the Fishers were murderers who had built a veritable labyrinth of torture chambers and prisoner cages in their inn. According to him, he stopped at John and Lavinia's inn late one evening to rest after his journey. At first, the hostess told Peoples there were no vacancies but offered him a hot dinner, during which she inquired about his financial situation and asked where he was coming from and where he was headed. That evening, John was in high spirits. He had closed several lucrative deals that earned him a large sum, and he decided to share his joy with the hospitable Lavinia. Upon learning that John was carrying a substantial amount of money, Mrs. Fisher suddenly announced she had found a vacant room for the guest and kindly offered him a cup of tea before bed. John, deeply touched by Lavinia's care, took the drink and went to his room. However, he didn't like tea and poured it down the sink, not wanting to offend the gracious hostess. And that is what saved his life. According to the victim's account, he sat in a chair that night, reviewing documents needed for his upcoming deals. After going through the papers, John was about to lie down when he saw his bed start to descend. Thanks to a clever mechanism, the sleeping place was slowly lowering through the floor. The stunned traveler quickly grabbed his belongings and jumped out the window, after which he managed to reach the nearest police station and report what had happened. The police immediately went to the Fisher's Inn and discovered in the basement a large room filled with numerous torture devices, cages, belongings of the missing guests, and traces of blood. Of course, Lavinia and John were promptly arrested and handed over to the court, which sentenced them to death by hanging. However, this is just one of many versions of what happened. Some historians believe that John Peoples was one of the blackmailers who recognized Lavinia as a fugitive slave and decided to profit from his discovery. Finding themselves in a hopeless situation, John Fisher shot one of the criminals, but Peoples managed to escape. That's how he ended up at the police station with a story about a maniacal couple who wanted to kill him. Supporters of this version claim that after being taken into custody, the lovers wrote to each other every day and until their last breath hoped for the court's mercy to start a new life together. They even once attempted to escape. John managed to climb down using several ropes, but his wife couldn't. After that, Mr. Fisher walked around the building and asked the jailers to send him back to his cell, unwilling to leave Lavinia. Incidentally, there is a third version. According to it, Lavinia Fisher belonged to a gang of bandits who were engaged in highway robbery on the road leading to Charleston. Despite numerous reports of robberies and murders, the police took no action, so the townspeople and locals decided to deal with the criminals themselves. Armed, a group of volunteers headed to the place where convoys were most often robbed, having first left one of their men at the 6 Mile Wayfarer house to observe the hostess's behavior and report later. However, events unfolded quite differently. Right after the group of citizens went on the hunt, the bandits came to the inn and caused a riot. David Ross, who was supposed to monitor the situation, saw Lavinia Fisher among them and asked for her help, but the woman began to strangle him and later smashed his head against the window frame several times. The victim miraculously managed to escape from the inn and reach the sheriff's office, who immediately organized a search of the Fisher's Inn and issued a warrant for their arrest, while the enraged residents of Charleston burned down the 6 Mile Wayfarer house, cursing the place where it stood. Despite the abundance of theories and versions, the end of this story is known to many. At the trial, the Fishers were sentenced to death. However, at that time, married women had one advantage. They were not subject to the death penalty, so Lavinia should have escaped the terrible punishment. However, the authorities soon found a loophole in the law. It was decided to execute John Fisher first, and a few days later carry out Lavinia's sentence, by which time she would already be a widow. When the day of the execution arrived, Lavinia Fisher, with the judge's permission, dressed in her wedding gown. She hoped that someone in the crowd would decide to marry her, and she could avoid death. But no miracle happened, and the woman found herself on the scaffold. Using her right to a final statement, Lavinia addressed the crowd and said the following: "If you have any message for the devil, I'll be seeing him shortly." After that, the executioner pulled the lever, and Lavinia Fisher officially became the first female serial killer executed in America. Yet people still wonder, who was she? A cruel criminal who killed for profit and pleasure, a member of a gang of hardened cutthroats, or an unfortunate victim of blackmailers' conspiracy?